A tiny blue stone in an Egyptian tomb began its journey in a faraway Afghan mountain. This is the hidden story of decorative stone inlays, and they hold the key to understanding our first global economy. By the end of this exploration, you will see ancient history not as isolated kingdoms, but as a deeply interconnected world. How did a civilization with no wheels move precious gems across continents? And why did kings value these distant stones more than gold? What does our own desire for beautiful things from far away reveal about a history we all share? That brilliant blue lapis lazuli was not simply glued into place. It was part of a sophisticated art form, one that transformed raw stone into a language of power and beauty. These were decorative stone inlays, a process as demanding as it was beautiful. Artisans would take small, precisely cut pieces of semi-precious stone, like deep blue lapis, fiery red carnelian, or vibrant green turquoise. They would then carefully set these individual pieces into a background material, often wood, ivory, or even gold. The result was not a flat surface, but a mosaic of incredible detail, creating everything from protective hieroglyphs to the feathers on a god's wings. This was far from a casual craft. It represented the peak of ancient technology and artistry, a skill set so valuable it was reserved for the objects of kings and the walls of temples. The very act of inlaying required a deep understanding of how different materials behaved. You needed specialized tools to cut the hard stone without shattering it, and a visionary patience to see how these disparate elements from distant mountains and foreign lands could be combined into a single, harmonious masterpiece. This foundational artistry, this desire to create something greater than the sum of its parts, sets the stage for a much bigger story. It forces us to ask why a ruler would go to such incredible lengths for a decorative effect, and what that choice reveals about the world he lived in. An archaeologist's brush gently clears millennia of dust from a Mesopotamian lyre, revealing a flash of deep, fiery red. The material is carnelian, a stone whose nearest known source lay hundreds of miles to the east in the distant Indus Valley. This single, vibrant piece is far more than mere decoration. It is a geographic fingerprint, a silent witness to journeys we are only just beginning to map. Each type of stone used in these ancient workshops carries a unique passport, a specific geologic origin that points like an arrow on a map. That brilliant blue lapis lazuli, for instance, could only have come from a handful of mines in the mountains of Badakhshan, in what is now Afghanistan. There is no local substitute, no alternative source that would explain its presence in an Egyptian tomb or a Mesopotamian palace. So when we find it, we are not just looking at a beautiful blue stone. We are holding a piece of evidence, a direct physical link proving that someone, or more likely a long chain of someone's, moved this object across staggering distances. This transforms a static artifact into a dynamic node within a vast, invisible web. These stones tell us that continents were connected by a flow of luxury and ideas long before the widespread use of the wheel, and centuries before the first empires we traditionally call global. They force us to redraw our mental maps, replacing isolated kingdoms with a landscape humming with quiet, determined exchange. What kind of network, then, could possibly support such an improbable flow of precious materials across such a challenging world? These geographic fingerprints do more than just point to a source. They allow us to draw the lines on the map. By tracing the distribution of stones like Anatolian obsidian or Sinai turquoise, archaeologists can reconstruct the invisible highways of the ancient world. These routes were anything but random. They were the strategic arteries of early commerce, carefully navigating the planet's natural contours. Caravans would have followed river valleys for water and easier travel, hugged coastlines for maritime resupply, and braved specific mountain passes that offered the only feasible way through towering ranges. Each find spot of a foreign stone is like a pin on a vast, ancient map. When you connect these pins, a stunning picture comes into focus. You see a network linking the resource-rich Indus Valley with the wealthy cities of Mesopotamia. You see sea routes connecting Egypt with the cultures of the Aegean. This was not a haphazard series of chance encounters. It was organized commerce on a continental scale, a testament to a level of logistical planning that is truly astonishing for such an early period. This system required trust between distant partners, a shared understanding of value, and a common desire for things of beauty. But a route is just a line on a map without the people who walked it. Who were the individuals that made this incredible long-distance exchange possible? That deep celestial blue was more than just a color. It was a direct connection to the divine. The variety of stones these ancient artisans sought reveals a world where every material was chosen with intention, a deliberate selection from a global palette of prestige. This was not a trade in a single luxury item. It was a diverse portfolio of exotic materials, each with its own unique physical properties and, more importantly, its own powerful symbolic meaning. Lapis lazuli, for instance, was not merely a beautiful blue stone. Its intense, star-flecked color was seen as a piece of the night sky itself, a physical fragment of the heavens that was associated with God's royalty and cosmic truth. To possess it was to hold a piece of divine power. Then there was carnelian with its fiery, translucent red hue. This stone pulsed with the symbolism of lifeblood, courage, and vital power. It was the color of the rising sun and the essence of life itself, making it a natural choice for amulets and royal insignia. Turquoise, with its vibrant green-blue color, was universally valued for its perceived protective qualities, believed to ward off evil and bring good fortune. This spectrum of meaning tells us something crucial. Demand for these stones was driven by much more than simple rarity. It was fueled by deep-seated cultural and spiritual beliefs. A king did not just want a blue stone, he wanted the specific blue stone that connected him to the gods. He did not just want a red gem, he wanted the one that symbolized his own life force and authority. The choice of material was a deliberate, nuanced statement, and the ability to acquire not just one, but a full palette of these symbolically charged stones from the farthest corners of the known world. That was the ultimate display of a ruler's far-reaching influence and immense wealth. It was a way of saying, my power is so great, it can summon the very elements of the cosmos to my court. But this global palette also presents us with a profound logistical puzzle. How did these delicate, symbolically charged materials actually survive their epic journeys across such vast and perilous landscapes? The immense value of a stone was not measured just by its color or its shine, but by the epic story of its journey. The sheer distance between a lapis lazuli mine in a remote Afghan mountain and an Egyptian pharaoh's workshop created a powerful economic force, the force of scarcity. A piece of this blue stone was worth very little at the source, but its value multiplied with every mile it traveled. This was not a simple markup. It was a value compounded by risk, by the months of arduous travel, and by the many hands that had to be trusted along the way. The stone itself became a physical container for that immense human effort. This fundamental principle of scarcity economics did more than just make exotic stones expensive. It built entire civilizations around their acquisition. The demand for these materials fueled specialized industries that stretched across continents. Deep in the mountains, mining communities developed sophisticated techniques to extract the precious stone. In urban workshops, master artisans honed their skills to transform raw material into objects of desire. And in between, a complex logistical network emerged, complete with merchants who financed the caravans, guards who protected them, and guides who knew the safest paths through treacherous terrain. This system required a common language of commerce, which led to one of humanity's most crucial inventions: standardized weights and measures. For trade to be fair and trusted over such vast distances, a unit of weight in Mesopotamia had to mean the exact same thing as a unit of weight in the Indus Valley. The presence of a tiny, perfectly cut stone inlay in a royal object is therefore so much more than a decoration. It is the final proof of a truly sophisticated economic mind. It reveals that early cultures not only understood concepts of luxury and supply and demand, but they had mastered them on an interregional scale. They knew how to create value, how to transport it, and how to transform it into a lasting symbol of power. Yet this entire magnificent system, from the miner's pick to the royal scepter, relied on a fragile thread of trust connecting strangers across thousands of miles. What kind of social glue could possibly hold such a far-flung network together? So the stone itself was only half the story. The true evidence of connection lies in the hands of the artisans who shaped it. A specific technique for drilling beads, using a distinctive double diamond-shaped drill bit, appears in workshops thousands of miles apart, from the Indus Valley to the great cities of Mesopotamia. This is not a coincidence, it is a technological fingerprint. The knowledge of how to work a material was often just as mobile as the material itself, moving along the very same trade routes. This suggests something profound. It was not just sealed chests of raw stone that traversed these ancient highways. It was people, artisans, perhaps accompanying a valuable shipment as part of the trade agreement, would have traveled carrying their specialized skills with them. Master craftsmen may have been sent as diplomatic gifts between royal courts, their knowledge a form of living tribute, or traders spending months at a foreign court would have shared techniques and learned new ones, creating a cross-pollination of ideas. This flow of knowledge created a shared visual language across vast distances. A king in Mesopotamia and a ruler in the Indus Valley, while speaking different languages and worshipping different gods, could both appreciate the fine, precise line of an inlay made with the same advanced method. The craftsmanship itself became a cultural bridge, a silent dialogue of skill and aesthetics that bound these early civilizations together in a common pursuit of perfection. The value was no longer just in the possession of a rare stone, but in the mastery of transforming it. This shared technical knowledge reveals a world far more interconnected than we once believed, a world where the greatest luxury of all was the human ingenuity that could cross any border. This command over distant resources was the ultimate political statement. A ruler was not merely a leader of his own people, he was a master of geography itself. When a Sumerian king commissioned a statue with eyes of deep blue lapis lazuli, he was not just creating art, he was making a claim. He was telling his court, his priests, and his rivals that his vision was literally formed from the stuff of the heavens, from a material so remote it was almost mythical. Similarly, an Egyptian pharaoh's sarcophagus, inlaid with the golden shimmer of Libyan desert glass, was not just a container. It was a declaration that his authority stretched beyond the Nile into the vast and desolate sands, commanding a material born from a cosmic event. These objects were powerful propaganda, but they were not for the masses. They were designed for elite and sacred spaces, for the temples and palaces where power was most concentrated. In these halls, a noble or a priest would see these intricate inlays and understand a simple, unshakable truth. the ruler who could summon the world's treasures to his doorstep must surely have the favor of the gods. This control of long-distance trade became a primary source of royal legitimacy. It was tangible proof of a divine right, a physical manifestation of a king's economic and spiritual reach. The ability to acquire, transform, and display these stones solidified the social hierarchy, placing the ruler at the very top of a pyramid that stretched across continents. The very presence of a foreign stone in a royal object was a silent, powerful sermon on the nature of power itself. But this system of elite exchange, this flow of divine symbols, did not exist in a vacuum. It was part of a much larger, more complex web of interaction that touched the lives of ordinary people in surprising ways. Buried within the royal cemetery of Ur, a wooden box tells a story of continents connected. Known today as the Standard of Ur, this object is far more than a military standard. It is a vibrant mosaic, a detailed narrative panel crafted from materials that themselves whisper of epic journeys. On one side, scenes of conflict are laid out in stark white shell from the distant Persian Gulf. On the other, a peaceful banquet unfolds, with figures adorned in the deep, celestial blue of lapis lazuli, a stone that could only have come from the mountains of Afghanistan. The background glows with a rich red limestone, a material some scholars trace all the way to the Indian subcontinent. Here, in one object no larger than a small suitcase, we have the Persian Gulf, the Hindu Kush, and the Indus Valley, all brought together by Sumerian artisans. This was not a collection of rare trinkets, it was a deliberate, curated statement. The city of Ur was not an isolated kingdom, but a cosmopolitan hub, a central node in a vast economic web. Its elites were not just local chieftains, but global consumers, their wealth and status defined by their access to the world's most desirable things. The standard is a physical map of their influence, a portrait of a prosperity built entirely on long-distance exchange. It proves that the desire to acquire beautiful things from far away was not a peripheral activity, but the very engine of their opulence. What, then, was the ultimate fate of these intricate networks that bound the ancient world together? That deep blue lapis lazuli was more than a trade good. It was a language of statecraft. Across the ancient Near East, royal courts were engaged in a delicate dance of diplomacy, and exotic stones were their most eloquent vocabulary. Cuneiform tablets discovered at Amarna, the capital of the pharaoh Akhenaten, preserve this dialogue in stunning detail. They reveal kings of Egypt, Babylon, and Mitanni negotiating not with threats but with gifts. A shipment of gold from Egypt might be reciprocated with a chest of perfectly worked lapis lazuli from Mesopotamia. These were not simple purchases. They were strategic exchanges, carefully calculated to cement a military alliance, secure a marriage treaty, or ensure the safe passage of merchants through a rival's territory. A single inlaid chest, therefore, was far more than a beautiful object. It was a physical manifestation of a political agreement, a bond carved from stone and set in gold. To accept such a gift was to accept a web of obligation and mutual respect. This created what scholars call a prestige goods economy, a parallel system that operated alongside standard market trade. In this rarefied world, the value of an object was not set by its weight alone, but by the political message it carried and the powerful relationship it symbolized. A small piece of carved carnelian could be worth more than a room full of grain if it arrived as a token of friendship from a formidable king 1,000 miles away. This system wove competing and often distant states into a fragile web of interdependence. It meant that a ruler's power was no longer measured solely by his army, but by the quality of his friendships and the reach of his diplomatic couriers. The most stable throne was one supported by a network of allies, all connected by the shared appreciation for the world's most beautiful and distant treasures. But what happened when this delicate system of gift and obligation began to falter? What forces could possibly unravel a network that had taken centuries to build? But behind every royal decree for lapis lazuli lay a merchant with a camel and a ledger. These were the intermediaries, the professional traders who transformed a king's abstract desire into a physical object in his treasury. While rulers claimed the glory, it was this emerging merchant class who navigated the real-world dangers and complex logistics. They operated not as lone adventurers, but within sophisticated family or guild networks that spanned generations. A father in Mesopotamia would teach his son the secret hand signals used in Anatolian markets. An uncle would pass down a meticulously guarded map of oases across the Arabian desert. This was knowledge as precious as the cargo itself, a living database of safe routes, local customs, and which officials could be trusted. They had to be linguists, negotiators, and meteorologists all at once. Their success, and often their survival, depended on an intimate understanding of the world. They knew when the mountain passes would be clear of snow, which coastal winds would favor a sea journey, and how to bargain in a dozen different dialects. These merchants bore immense risks that never touched the insulated halls of power. A single sandstorm could bury a caravan and its fortune. Shifting political alliances could turn a friendly city into hostile territory overnight. The widespread presence of decorative stone inlays from one civilization to another is therefore indirect but powerful evidence. It is the archaeological signature of a professional merchant class rising to global prominence. They were the vital connective tissue, the human engine that made early globalization possible. They translated royal demand into tangible goods, moving not just stone but ideas, technologies, and a shared sense of value across the known world. What kind of profound social change did this new economic power inevitably set in motion? A forgotten object's true story is often locked within its materials. The very stones chosen for a royal inlay become a kind of historical clock ticking in geologic time. When archaeologists uncover an artifact, the specific combination of exotic stones can pinpoint its creation to a narrow window in history. This is because the flow of these precious materials was never constant. It pulsed and faltered with the rhythm of the ancient world itself. A magnificent chest, overflowing with deep blue lapis lazuli and fiery red carnelian, speaks of a golden age. It tells us of mountain passes kept open by political agreement, of seas patrolled to protect merchant ships, and of kings in distant lands who respected the same unspoken rules of commerce. The stones are proof of a moment when the network was strong, its connections vibrant and secure. But then, a century later, in the very same city, the royal workshops might produce objects using only local shells and brightly painted faience. The celestial blue is gone. That absence is just as loud as its presence. It is a silence that echoes with the collapse of an empire, the closing of a vital route by a new and hostile power, or perhaps a generations-long drought that made a desert crossing impossible. The stones themselves become a barometer for the political and environmental climate of an entire region. This allows researchers to do more than just guess at dates. They can build a precise chronology, layer by layer, object by object. When a piece of lapis lazuli is found in a sealed archaeological layer, perhaps beneath the floor of a temple, scientists can date that specific layer with confidence. They know that the stone could only have arrived during a time when the long road from Afghanistan was open for business. Each inlaid object is a single frame in a long, unfolding film of human connection and separation. What other secrets might these silent stones reveal when we learn to listen to their timeline? The vibrant blue of a Minoan fresco was a color borrowed from another world. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, artists adorned the walls of their palaces with leaping dolphins and graceful courtiers, all rendered in a brilliant blue that spoke of connections across the deep sea. Scientific analysis reveals that this specific pigment was not a local creation. It was Egyptian blue frit, a manufactured pigment whose recipe was a closely guarded secret of the Nile Valley. In some of the most elite Minoan artworks, we find an even more telling material, the deep celestial blue of lapis lazuli itself, a stone whose journey from the mountains of Afghanistan to a Mediterranean island is almost unimaginable. This was not a coincidence. The Minoans were the great mariners of their age, their ships plying the routes between the Aegean, Egypt, and the ports of the Near East. They were not just carrying pottery and oil, they were the vital middlemen in the exchange of raw prestige and ideas. The presence of these specific materials on Crete is the chemical signature of a thriving trans-Mediterranean network, a maritime highway for luxury goods that connected distant civilizations. But the exchange went far deeper than cargo. Look closely at the art. The Minoan frescoes themselves began to incorporate Egyptian motifs, stylistic elements and symbols that were foreign to their own tradition. A griffin might appear in a pose familiar from a Nile temple wall, or a floral pattern echo the papyrus designs of the south. This tells us that the ships were carrying more than just blue pigment in their holds. They were carrying artistic concepts, a shared visual language that began to blend and cross-pollinate. This was not a simple transaction of goods for gold. It was a true cultural dialogue, a conversation in color and form conducted across the waves. The Minoan artist, using his precious Egyptian blue, was not just decorating a wall. He was participating in a Mediterranean-wide exchange, proving that the most enduring cargo is often an idea. The true mastery of these materials was not just in acquiring them, but in the power to transform them. Shaping a block of raw lapis lazuli into a feather-thin sliver, perfectly sized to fit the eye of a god, was one of the ancient world's most demanding technical challenges. This was not a task for simple chisels. Artisans relied on a sophisticated toolkit, most notably the bow-driven drill. Imagine a craftsman, his hands guiding a wooden shaft, while a bow soared back and forth, spinning a copper or stone drill bit at its tip. The real cutting power did not come from the bit itself, but from a clever addition. The artisan would constantly feed an abrasive paste, a gritty slurry of crushed emery or quartz dust under the drill point. This hard sand did the actual grinding, slowly, meticulously eating into the unyielding stone. One wrong move, one moment of impatience, and the precious material could fracture, wasting months of effort and a fortune in raw stone. This was a skill that could not be rushed. It demanded a deep, intuitive feel for the material, an understanding of its hidden faults and its response to pressure. A master inlayer did not simply cut stone, he conversed with it. This level of expertise was not born from a casual hobby. The archaeological record reveals dedicated workshops, entire city districts where the constant hum of bow drills and the smell of grinding stone filled the air. Here, artisans worked in teams, some specializing in the initial rough cutting of blocks, others in the precise drilling of holes, and the most skilled in the final polishing that released the stone's inner fire. This high degree of specialization is a profound clue. It tells us that these early urban centers were not just collections of farmers and rulers. They were complex, layered economies that could support entire classes of people who did not produce their own food. Their survival was made possible by the agricultural surplus and concentrated wealth of the city itself, a wealth that was, in a beautiful circular logic, generated in large part by the very long-distance trade these artisans served. The merchant's caravan did not just bring raw stone, it sustained the entire ecosystem of skill required to unlock its ultimate value. The true power of these objects was felt, not just seen. In the flickering torchlight of a windowless temple, a statue adorned with stone inlays would have seemed almost alive. The polished surfaces of lapis and carnelian would not sit statically, but would catch the moving light, creating a subtle, mesmerizing shimmer. This dynamic play of light and shadow transformed a static image into a living presence, a divine figure that seemed to breathe in the half-darkness. The experience was also profoundly tactile. A priest or a ruler handling a ceremonial dagger or a small box inlaid with these stones would feel their distinctive textures. The cool, glassy smoothness of polished carnelian, the slightly granular feel of deep blue lapis, these sensations added a tangible dimension to their luxury. This was an opulence you could touch, a physical connection to the object's immense value and distant origins. Even the names of the materials reinforced their mythical status. To speak of a stone from the land of Meluha, a faraway place scholars associate with the Indus Valley, was to invoke a spoken legend. These names were not mere labels, they were verbal incantations of power and distance. The full sensory impact of these objects, from their shimmering visual presence to their cool touch and exotic names, created an immersive experience that plain wood or local clay simply could not match. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony for the senses, designed to overwhelm and convince all who encountered it of the owner's unshakable, almost supernatural authority. Even the driest desert once held the memory of rain. The journey of a single turquoise stone from a mine in the Sinai to a royal workshop was not just a matter of trade routes, it was a negotiation with the climate itself. The very existence of these mines was entirely dependent on fragile oases, pockets of water that allowed miners to live and work in an unforgiving landscape. When archaeologists study the timeline of these operations, they find clear cycles of intense activity followed by complete abandonment. These periods of silence do not align with political upheaval or war, but with something far more powerful. They align perfectly with known droughts recorded in the paleoclimatic record. A mine that once echoed with the sound of picks would fall silent for generations, not because the turquoise was gone, but because the water that sustained the miners had vanished. The stone itself becomes a proxy, a hard, enduring witness to the soft, vital element that made its extraction possible. This connection extends from the desert to the sea. The delicate shells used for inlay, sourced from the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, are more than just decorative items. They are tiny environmental recorders. Different species of these shells thrive at specific depths and water temperatures. Finding a particular type of shell in an inland city, far from its native habitat, does more than prove a trade link. It tells us what the coastal environment was like at the time it was harvested. A shift in the dominant shell species found in archaeological layers can indicate changes in sea level, fluctuations in water temperature, or even the transformation of coastal ecosystems. So, a shimmering white shell inlaid in a Mesopotamian lyre carries within its curves a story about the ancient shoreline it once called home. Every material choice an ancient artisan made was therefore a choice constrained by the natural world. The flow of luxury goods was a pulse that beat in rhythm with the planet's climate, surging in wet periods and faltering in times of environmental stress. This reveals a profound truth that the brilliance of early civilization was not a triumph over nature, but a delicate and ongoing dance with it. These stones were more than just decorations, they were fragments of the cosmos itself. In the minds of these early peoples, a piece of deep blue lapis lazuli was not merely a beautiful mineral. It was a solid piece of the night sky, fallen to earth and waiting to be claimed. That fiery red carnelian was not just colored quartz, it was the captured essence of lifeblood and the power of fire. And the vibrant green-blue of turquoise was believed to be a living stone, one that could protect its wearer from harm. This was a world alive with meaning, where every material held a hidden power. When a king or a priest commissioned an object inlaid with these stones, they were doing something far more profound than ordering a luxury item. They were engaging in a form of spiritual architecture. They were literally building their understanding of the universe into the very objects that defined their power and their connection to the gods. A royal scepter inlaid with lapis was not just a symbol of authority, it was a direct channel to the heavens. A temple wall decorated with turquoise was not just a colorful facade, it was a protective barrier against chaos. This ideological dimension transformed the long-distance trade in these materials from a simple economic activity into a sacred quest. The demand was driven by a deep, spiritual need to possess and control the fundamental forces of creation. The most powerful ruler was not just the one with the largest army, but the one who could gather the very building blocks of reality to fortify his reign. This quest for cosmic power created a shared language of belief that spanned vast distances. A king in Mesopotamia and a pharaoh in Egypt, though separated by deserts and speaking different tongues, both looked to the same deep blue stone as a piece of the divine. This shared cosmology meant that the exchange of these materials was also an exchange of ideas, a silent agreement about how the world worked and where true power resided. To acquire a stone from a legendary, far-off land was to tap into the mysterious power of the foreign, to access a strength that was not available locally. The trade routes, then, were not just conduits for goods, they were the arteries through which the ancient world's understanding of the cosmos itself flowed and circulated. The brilliance of genuine lapis lazuli cast a long shadow, one filled with clever imitations. When a prized material becomes too rare or too costly for most people to own, human ingenuity finds a way to replicate its beauty. Across the ancient world, artisans developed remarkable substitutes. In Egypt, they perfected a material called faience, a glazed ceramic that could be molded and fired to achieve the stunning blue-green of turquoise or the deep celestial hue of lapis. This was not a cheap forgery intended to deceive the gods or the king. It was something far more revealing. It was an affordable luxury for those who aspired to the symbols of status but lacked the means to acquire the real thing. The existence of these substitutes points to a powerful social phenomenon, a trickle-down effect of desire. The royal court set the standard for what was beautiful and prestigious. A priest or a minor official seeing the pharaoh's genuine lapis inlays would naturally crave that same connection to power and divinity. Faience offered a pathway. It allowed a growing class of prosperous merchants, skilled scribes, and local administrators to participate in the visual language of the elite, even if with a locally made version. This created a tiered economy of prestige. At the very top were the rulers and high priests with their genuine, imported stones, direct proof of their global reach. Just below them, a bustling shadow economy catered to the social ambitions of a rising middle class, providing them with the look, if not the literal substance, of that distant power. This tells us that the value of these stones was not just in their physical properties, but in the powerful ideas they represented. The desire to possess a piece of that symbolic world was so strong it fueled an entire industry of simulation. What does this tell us about the very nature of value and the enduring human drive to acquire status, even when the original is out of reach? the story of these stones is not just about what was brought in, but what was sent out. For centuries, our gaze has been fixed on the great importers like Egypt and Mesopotamia, the final consumers of these glittering treasures. But a shift in perspective reveals an equally powerful player, one whose economic engine was built on export. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing from around 3,300 to 1,300 before the Common Era, was a hidden manufacturing giant. Across the sites of ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of vibrant red carnelian beads, all chemically traced back to the Indus River region. This was not a casual trade, it was a targeted export industry on a massive scale. The Indus people did not just dig up the raw stone, they perfected it. They developed a secret recipe, a unique chemical process that could bleach the surface of the carnelian. Then, using a precise alkaline paste, they would etch intricate, brilliant white patterns onto the deep red stone. The result was a bead unlike any other, a miniature masterpiece of contrasting color and geometric design. This was a technological signature, a craft secret so valued that it became their brand across the ancient world. The sheer volume of these beads found in Mesopotamian cities suggests this was not a side project. It was central to their identity. Their famously planned cities like Mohenjo-Daro, with their orderly streets and advanced water management, may have been more than just administrative centers. They might have been the ancient world's first industrial parks, entire urban landscapes dedicated to the mass production of luxury goods for a global market. This completely reverses the traditional narrative. We are not looking at a passive recipient of foreign influence, but a sophisticated, outward-looking civilization whose prosperity was woven into the very fabric of international demand. Their economic vitality depended on their ability to supply the desires of their Western neighbors, proving that the flow of beauty and innovation was never just a one-way street. The vibrant red of a carnelian bead, once a common sight in Mesopotamian markets, slowly vanishes from the archaeological record. This disappearance is not an accident of preservation, it is a symptom of a system in collapse. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the great palace centers of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East began to fall silent. In the layers of earth that mark this tumultuous period, archaeologists find a sudden and profound silence where there was once a symphony of exotic materials. The deep blue of lapis lazuli, the creamy white of imported ivory, the fiery glow of carefully worked carnelian, these colors fade from the artistic palette almost entirely. This is not merely a change in artistic fashion, it is the material evidence of a world coming apart. The long-distance exchange networks, those delicate threads that had connected kingdoms for centuries, were being severed one by one. This collapse was likely not the result of a single catastrophe, but a cascade of failures. Shifts in climate may have led to widespread crop shortages, straining the agricultural surplus that supported artisans and merchants. Internal conflicts within kingdoms could have disrupted the centralized authority needed to protect caravan routes, and the movement of new groups of people put further pressure on these already strained systems. The interdependence that had been the source of their greatest strength became their greatest vulnerability. When one node in the network faltered, the shockwaves traveled down the line, disrupting the flow of goods and the trust that made it all possible. The absence of a single, familiar blue stone in a royal workshop, therefore, speaks louder than its presence ever could. It is the silent, stark proof of a globalized experiment that for a time failed. What emerges from the dust after such a fracture, and how does the human drive for connection find a way to begin again? A stone's journey was defined by the path it took. The choice between a dusty overland trail and an open sea lane was not just about distance, It was a fundamental decision about risk, cost, and the very nature of the goods being moved. Overland routes snaking through the high plateaus of Iran or across the vast Syrian desert were exercises in endurance. A caravan's progress was measured in the slow, plodding steps of donkeys and camels. This slowness was compounded by a constant vulnerability. Every city-state and local chieftain along the way could demand a toll for safe passage, a tax that accumulated with every border crossed. The final price of a lapis lazuli pebble was not just its value at the mine, but the sum of all these political transactions, making it an extravagance only a king could afford. The route itself was fragile, hostage to the shifting sands of political alliances. A conflict between two unknown tribes hundreds of miles away could snap this terrestrial thread, cutting off the supply for a generation. In this high-stakes environment, the physical properties of the stone mattered immensely. Lighter, less brittle materials would have been strongly favored for such an arduous land journey. Contrast this with the maritime routes pioneered by cultures like the Minoans and later the Phoenicians. Their ships, though at the mercy of the weather, could carry a vastly larger volume of cargo in a single voyage. A ship's hold could be filled with raw stone blocks, materials that would have been economically impossible to transport in quantity overland. This volume had a democratizing effect. While still luxurious, certain stones could become more accessible to a wider elite, not just the absolute ruler. By carefully analyzing the archaeological record, we can see these logistical choices reflected in the stones themselves. A coastal city like Byblos might show evidence of a diverse and abundant array of imported materials, a testament to its role as a maritime hub. An inland capital, however, might reveal a more curated selection, dominated by the very specific, high-value stones that were worth the immense overland cost, like that celestial blue lapis. The types and quantities of stones found at a site are a direct readout of its place in the ancient logistical web, revealing whether it was a terminus of a slow, expensive land route or a vibrant port humming with the activity of ocean-going ships. This hidden geography of trade raises a compelling question. How did these first global networks manage the flow of information across such vast and silent distances? That lapis lazuli inlay was a statement of who you were, and more importantly, who you were not. In the rigidly structured worlds of early civilizations, the possession of these glittering objects was a privilege reserved for an incredibly small circle. Kings, queens, and the highest-ranking priests could commission them. A tiny fraction of phenomenally successful merchants might acquire one as a symbol of their arrived status. But for the vast majority of people, the farmers, the laborers, the soldiers, an object inlaid with Afghan lapis or Indus carnelian was as distant and unattainable as the stars. They might see these treasures during grand public ceremonies, carried in procession, but they would never hold one. This created a material culture of profound inequality, a world where your social standing was literally visible in the materials you could command. The control over these long-distance luxuries was not a byproduct of power, it was a primary tool for enforcing it. By monopolizing the flow and display of the world's most beautiful things, the elite created a visual and tactile barrier between themselves and everyone else. A farmer tilling the land with simple clay tools lived in a sensory world of earth and rough pottery. A priest in a temple, handling a ritual object shimmering with polished, imported stone, inhabited a different universe entirely. This sensory divide made the social hierarchy feel natural, permanent, and unquestionable. It was a constant, silent sermon that said the gods had ordained this order, and the proof was right there, gleaming in the light for all to see. The brilliance of these stones, therefore, casts a shadow, one that outlines the sharp, unyielding lines of the world's first-class systems. But how can we be so certain of a stone's distant origin? The deep blue hue of lapis might point toward Afghanistan, but certainty requires a more rigorous kind of proof, one found in the archaeologist's modern toolkit. Gone are the days of relying on educated guesses based on color or texture alone. Today, a revolution in scientific sourcing allows us to read the unique geochemical passport embedded within every stone. Techniques with complex names like X-ray fluorescence, which acts like a high-tech scanner revealing a material's elemental makeup, or laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, an incredibly precise method that vaporizes a microscopic speck of the stone to identify its trace chemical signature. These are the tools that turn a beautiful artifact into a hard data point. Think of it this way: every geologic source, every single lapis lazuli mine in the mountains of Afghanistan has a unique chemical fingerprint, a specific combination of trace elements that acts like a birth certificate. By comparing the fingerprint of a stone from an Egyptian necklace to the known fingerprints of mines across the ancient world, scientists can now make a definitive match. This is how we know, beyond any doubt, that a specific piece of blue stone in a pharaoh's tomb came from a specific valley hundreds of miles away. This non-destructive analysis allows archaeologists to move from general assumptions to precise provenancing, transforming our understanding from a blurry sketch into a high-resolution map of ancient economic and social connections. We are no longer just telling stories about trade. We are mapping it with the very atoms that compose these treasured objects. Royal inscriptions carved into palace walls tell one story, a narrative of conquest and obligatory tribute from defeated rivals. Yet the quiet evidence of the stones suggests a far more nuanced reality, a world of delicate social negotiations that official histories often overlook. Much of this long-distance exchange actually thrived in what scholars call a prestige economy. This was a parallel system, operating alongside formal markets and tax collections, where value was measured not just in weight but in social capital and political alliance. Think of it as the ancient world's version of high-level diplomacy, where the most powerful players exchanged gifts to build trust and display their status. A king might officially record the receipt of a herd of horses from a neighboring ruler as simple tribute, a sign of his own dominance. But the unrecorded reciprocal gift, a chest of exquisite lapis lazuli inlays sent back a season later, reveals the truth. This was not a one-sided demand, but a careful dance of mutual respect and obligation. The written records, focused on glory and conquest, often fail to capture this subtle, day-to-day barter of prestige. This is where the silent testimony of the stones becomes our most vital source. A single piece of foreign stone in a royal tomb is a data point that the scribes never bothered to write down. It speaks of a friendship between courts, an aspiration for a certain kind of status, or a quiet competition between elites who all sought the same symbols of power. These materials give a voice to the unwritten rules, the social grammar that governed how early civilizations interacted. They reveal that beneath the boasts of military might, the true foundation of international relations was often built on a shared appreciation for beauty and the unspoken agreements that made its exchange possible. That deep blue stone from an Afghan mountain is a direct ancestor of the smartphone in your pocket. The fundamental architecture of our modern world, with its intricate supply chains and globalized desire, was first drafted not in silicon but in stone. The ancient lapis lazuli route was indeed the original Silk Road, a proof of concept for connecting distant human endeavors into a single, interdependent system. We see the same patterns echoing across millennia. The elite of displayed their status with imported gems, just as today's luxury brands signal prestige with goods sourced from Italy or Switzerland. The complex overland and maritime routes, fraught with risk and requiring immense trust, were the Bronze Age equivalent of our modern shipping lanes and air freight networks. The entire system was built on a foundational human truth: the powerful desire to possess something beautiful, rare, and from a faraway place. This drive is not a modern invention. It is a thread woven into the fabric of our species. By understanding these ancient exchanges, we see our own world with new clarity. Our global economy is not a sudden rupture from the past, but the latest, fastest iteration of a story that began when the first merchant loaded a camel with precious stones and looked toward the horizon. It reminds us that our shared history is not just one of conflict and kingdoms, but of countless quiet journeys, of objects and ideas constantly in motion, connecting us across time and space in a continuous, unfolding conversation. Each of these threads, from the merchant's ledger to the king's decree, is essential, yet none tells the complete story on its own. The true power of these objects emerges only when we weave them together. That small, polished piece of lapis lazuli in an Egyptian necklace is simultaneously a fragment of an Afghan mountain. It is the product of a master artisan's patient skill, using a bow drill and abrasive sand. It is a commodity whose value was multiplied by a 1,000-mile journey. It is a symbol of divine right for the ruler who owned it, and a sacred piece of the cosmos for the priest who handled it. To see it as merely a blue stone is to miss the entire symphony. It is a nexus, a single point where geology, economics, politics, technology, and belief all intersect. When we learn to read this convergence, our understanding of ancient history transforms. We stop seeing static artifacts in museum cases and begin to appreciate them as dynamic records. They become frozen moments in a vast, humming network of human aspiration. This synthesized view reveals a world that was complex, deeply interconnected, and in its own way profoundly modern. The decorative stone inlay, therefore, is more than an object of beauty. It is a key that unlocks a richer, more human story of our shared past, a story written not in words, but in the very materials our ancestors chose to cherish. These small, brilliant pieces of stone are the ultimate synthesis of our ancient past. They are not merely decorative embellishments, but silent witnesses to the ambition, ingenuity, and profound interconnectedness of our earliest civilizations. They reveal a world where a king in his palace on the Nile knew intimately of mountains in a distant Afghan valley, not through conquest but through commerce. They speak of merchants who braved unimaginable journeys across deserts and seas, and of a shared human understanding that the value of an object was measured in both its inherent beauty and the epic story of its journey. This was a world already globalized in its desires. The next time you see an image of an ancient artifact, perhaps a golden mask or a ceremonial chest, look closer at the materials themselves. That flash of blue, that sliver of red, you are not just looking at a beautiful object. You are looking at a map of trade routes, of human relationships, and of a world that was far more conversant and connected than we often give it credit for. If this journey through time has captivated you, if you feel the pull of these ancient mysteries, help us uncover more secrets by subscribing to the channel. What forgotten story should we decode next? Let us know in the comments below.